this is the sad reality of automotive repair. Over here, we have a 2007 Toyota Avalon that the owner brought here because they got tired of the dealership and another mechanic telling them something that doesn't seem to be the case. So the owner of this car has a problem with this car occasionally, kind of rumbling and stumbling at idle only. Once you get it off idle, it's perfectly fine. Initially, when this problem started happening, there was no check engine light nor nothing. But recently, the check engine light did come on, and the dealership and their independent mechanic went from, let's look into the issue, to, oh, you need a new engine, you might as well junk the whole car because it's not worth it. This car has 281,000 miles. Some people will jump and are like, oh, it's a good idea, let's junk it. Actually, not really. It's actually not in bad shape. And the reason for that is this is a one-owner car. You look at the service history, it is filled with pretty much everything under the sun. Every single maintenance has been done to this car because the owner, when they bought it new, they wanted to get high miles out of this car. And they're kind of disappointed that they only got 281,000 before it needed a whole engine. But the problem is, does it? And this kind of shocks me that a dealership would say that. Maybe independent mechanic, not familiar with these cars or this engine, but a dealership? Let's take a look. Let's pop the hood, and this car has been maintained almost all its life by the dealership. Let's take a look. Now, at any given point, the technicians that were working on this car, doing all kinds of sometimes unnecessary maintenance, did they bother to clean this engine bay? At least wipe it down real quick? Not exactly. The only thing that is nice and clean here is the brand new battery that the owner just had AAA put in. But the problem with this car is the check engine light. We have code P0015 and P0017. These codes can be so scary if you don't know what they are. Because one of them, especially the 17, it says cam crank correlation. Typically that means is the camshaft and the crankshaft are no longer in correlation. Something is going on. In the case of a timing belt engine, timing belt jump tooth, and now we're off time. In a chain, it is usually a stretched chain. Except this engine. This engine, we've talked about this in a previous video, had a known problem, and there's actually a TSB from Toyota saying, hey, don't go jumping and replacing chains on this. You can set that code when you have a bad oil control valve. Almost every dealership stocks these valves on their shelf. I'm having a hard time understanding is, why does the dealership tell this owner, it's a stretched chain, get a new engine? Get a used engine, put it in, or better yet, scrap the whole car because it has too much miles. I'm sorry, last time I checked, Toyotas do last 300,000–400,000 miles. And the biggest problem is when you start this engine. I'm going to start this engine and let's listen to it. Sounds like a healthy engine to me. And actually, it's extremely quiet. This is a cold engine right now. It's been sitting here for a while. Sounds perfectly healthy. No ticking, no noises, no grinds when you started it, VVTi gear. Nothing. So, this is the problem. Let me shut off the car before we suffocate ourselves. This is my problem as an owner. You drove this car that was completely smooth, quiet. I mean, these Avalons are very quiet and nice. And you came in a dealership, no smoking, no bad gas mileage, no real running problems, the occasional stumble at idle. According to the owner, once every 3 weeks it happens once. And the mechanic tells you you need a new engine. I want you to stop at that moment and question it. Yes, question it, because if I am the mechanic working in this car, you drove this car perfectly fine. No noise, no problems, no issues. And I tell you, oh, you need a new engine. It's done. You need to question that. Because why? But the best part is, The owner saw my video on my channel about the OCV valves. No news. That video was, I assumed when I made that video that everybody knew about the OCV valves, but in case you didn't, she called this dealership that just told her you need a new engine. Told them, hey, is there any chance it might be an OCV valve? They told her, don't question our diagnosis. You need a new engine and you need another car. And actually, we don't even want to work on this car anymore. We don't want to do anything with it. Too many miles, just get rid of it. Then she calls a family trusted mechanic who also looked at this car, who also said it needs everything. It needs a whole engine. He told her, started yelling at her, that she should not tell him how to do his job and not listen to somebody on the internet rambling some random stuff. This saddens my heart. Not the rambling, you can call me whatever you want. Everybody has their opinion and I respect that. Mechanics typically don't like to be told what to do, except when they don't do what they're supposed to do, like in this case. Here's what we told this customer. Let me tell you what we're going to do with this car before we lift it up and actually look at the 7 things that they missed about this car that they want to put a new engine. There is a chance we might have oil contamination. It is a higher mile engine. Things are possible. But the first thing is, when I activate the exhaust, it's actually the code is for exhaust, bank 1, back bank, oil control valve. When I activate it, it works. That means my gear is good, my lines are good, pressures are good, the filter is not clogged, everything is working. The only thing that would cause intermittent issues like that is the OCV valve or a partially clogged passage. We're going to take our chances here and put an OCV valve before we condemn the entire engine, which runs perfectly fine, doesn't burn oil, not dirty inside, doesn't really have otherwise major issues. It is a high mile engine, does have oil leaks, which we're going to look at it in a second. Let's lift this car up. Let's look at the rest of the things that I saw with this car that just tells me things are not well. Let's look underneath it, because again, this car recently, before this whole hiatus started, was at the dealership where they did services. They changed fluids, they flushed this, flushed that, and again, I see this scenario over and over and over. It's disgusting. Let's take a look. First thing is, there is a lot of oil. I mean, a lot of oil here. And when I told the customer, they were actually surprised that there's this much oil underneath it, and they were like, wait a minute, oil leaks? That's the first problem. This is a front timing cover that is leaking. Nothing new. We've seen this over and over and over on the 2GR. Hardly the end of the world. You can fix it, but the engine has to come out. It's a major operation. It's gonna drip here and there, car this miles. I asked the customer, how long, what's the plan with this car? She wants 2 more years of light driving. I'm like, this becomes a non-cross-country trip car, but it's still drivable. You can still run errands with it, go to work and back. You're gonna deal with things here and there, but as long as it's safe. And speaking on the safe part, we're gonna talk about that in a little bit. But something very, very interesting to me. If we look here, this is the oil pressure switch. I hope you can see it very well. Right there, oil pressure switch. Then there is this wire that's just sitting here. Actually, at some point, the compressor was replaced, and whoever replaced it decided, we don't need the bracket that holds this. And actually, I plugged this oil pressure switch back because it was just broken. You know, I can actually see the green on the connector. This has been just sitting here like that. Very high quality craftsmanship there. I hope this was not the dealership because this is embarrassing. This is really not good. How do you leave an oil pressure switch off? If this engine runs out of pressure, there's no warning light. That's it. You're just gonna run this engine to the ground, while if there was a warning light, you would know about it. But then we get to the most important part. I drove this car, which by the way, drives perfectly fine. Nice and quiet, no leaks from the exhaust, so it's quiet. Smooth suspension-ish. It's not perfect. We're going to show you what's not perfect about it. But the first thing I notice is when I hit the brakes, there's no brakes. The car swerves to the right, and then it's just fade. Almost no brakes. The reason for that is if you ever get that in your car, if the pins for the calipers are seized, that's the problem. You'll get like a sinky pedal feel. Very common with Toyotas. Super, not really something difficult to fix. But the problem is, all these brakes are supposedly dealership brakes. Now, I see a lot of aftermarket parts here, so over the long period of ownership, they did have an independent mechanic work on it. Perhaps they put the aftermarket brakes. We're not going to hold the dealership to that. But the owner is almost sure, and even if they're wrong, and this was an independent mechanic, that they just had the rear brakes done. Now, let's come around and look at them. This rotor looks like it has been here for an extremely long time. I mean, by the rust levels, this has been here for a while. But then when you look at the pad, that's a brand new pad. That's literally a brand new pad. I give this pad a few weeks old, which it is. Whoever did the brakes here, I can't guarantee you he never drove this car. There's no brakes on this car. You press the brake, car swerves, and then you just this mushy pedal. And that's because the pins are seized all across, all of them are seized. I understand the front. You didn't work on the front, although you should have said something about it. But you just put pads in the back, free up the pins, clean it up, do quality work. This is a liability to the mechanic. And then looking at the rest of the car, rust levels, pretty low. I am very proud of the dealership that sold this car. Apparently serviced it, but not too well, because they put the body plugs. Body plugs are here, at least this one. This one, however, that potentially fell off, because if I see one, doubt. But while we're here, let's take an opportunity to look at this. There's a body plug here. Look at this area. It does have a little bit of rust, but not as much. And then we look here. There is no body plug. Look at the amount of rust there is around that area. Folks, these body plugs are pretty important. If you see them missing, put one on. It's not too late. Do you see the problem with this? I mean, you maintain this car, mechanic or dealership, you're not advising your customer accordingly. And then when problems do happen, real problems, you just tell them get rid of the car. How easy is that? And then the other problem, more oil leaks, is from the transmission. And there's something distinct about this. Most people will see this, oh yeah, transmission is leaking, not a big deal. Well, it is actually a big deal. Because what's leaking is not the transmission, it is the axle seals of the new axle, aftermarket axles. They're not very new, but here we go again. Somebody did a repair, fix one thing, destroy another thing. But the best part about it is, if you look at this appearance of this shiny part, when you see this, this is a red flag about your mechanic. So here's what happens with these cars. Aluminum oxidizes as it sits exposed to salt and elements. It oxidizes, it gets that whitish appearance. But when it's covered in oil, it doesn't no longer have access to that oxidation process. But when you clean it, you expose clean aluminum. So somebody has been cleaning this left and right. Instead of saying, hey, your transmission is leaking oil or your axle seals are both leaking because we destroyed the axle seals when we did your axles, they just clean it up. Brake clean, clean it, ship it. This is not only unethical, it's just so wrong on every level. I mean, look, There is nothing worse in the mechanic world when something goes south, and worse when you have a comeback. Every single mechanic have had comebacks. We're humans, we're imperfect. But you know what? When you do have a comeback, make it right. You made a mistake, make it right, because it's just the right thing to do. Axle seals leaked, you nicked it when you put the axle. You're gonna get upset about it, but it's not the customer's fault. Don't be upset at the customer in the car. Be upset at yourself a little bit, but then move on, fix it, let it go. That's it. That's all there is when there is comebacks. Not the case with this car. I don't see this car condemned, honestly. I usually will tell you certain cars, let go of them, but I don't see the signs of this one. Transmission has been serviced all its life. It shifts perfectly fine. The engine runs perfectly fine. Leaks oil. But again, if this car had 150,000 miles, it would also be leaking oil. That's just the thing with this engine. My problem is the owner of this car spent countless dollars on this car to maintain it, to keep it, because they wanted to get high miles out of it. But I see aftermarket parts everywhere. I see neglected repairs. Should the dealership would have told this customer at 150,000 miles, hey, your front timing cover is leaking, they might have let them pull the engine down and do it. But they didn't. Instead, they brake clean the leaks, just do the easy work, brakes, flushes, whatever, and ship it. This is not right, folks. And the last thing that on the aftermarket list of things, front quick struts. Some dealerships lately are starting to try to be competitive with the aftermarket world. It is a very bad idea because the only point of going to the dealership is original parts. If they're not using original parts, there's no real benefit. Yes, they're trained supposedly and qualified, and they are. There are a lot of good mechanics in dealerships because mechanics are paid well. But there's also a lot of horrible mechanics at dealerships because there's a lack of technicians in the industry. So they end up wanting to hire whoever just to have bodies that do the work. That's the unfortunate truth of the automotive business. Let's lower this car, let's look inside of it, because this is a one-owner car. They really took care of this car to the best of their ability, but they were limited by the mechanic. Let's take a quick look inside this Avalon. Can't open the door more than this. I love these Avalons. I used to actually own one, 2008, in the blue color. Not the best color in it, but it was a really good deal. I ended up buying it for a short period of time. And this interior holds up really well. This car has 281,000 miles. And here is the interior on that. Because the owner cares for this car. They want it to last. They took care of it. Look at these back seats. I mean, one of the things about this Avalon is it has a huge opening for the back seat. Pretty clean. Something that's common on these. The headliner loves to sag in the back. And if you see this, folks, you can buy adhesive, like headliner adhesive or cushioning adhesive, not really meant for cars. Just spray it on the headliner and glue it back. It's not gonna look pretty, but I see it as kind of a safety concern. You're looking in your rearview mirror and this is obstructing your view. It's not a great idea. So do something about it. Even if you put pins just to hold it up, that's also fine, but just do something about it because it obstructs your view and that's not good for safety. Small update about this car. So we replaced the oil control valve. We replaced the spark plugs as well because they were due again. Actually a little overdue. Drove the car drove perfectly fine, gave it back to the customer, and the customer recently, within a week or two, brought it in for an oil change at 285,000 miles. They were very happy to report that the car runs perfectly fine. No hesitation, no check engine light, smoothed out, cleared out, everything is good. That's all it needed. So that was just a little verification for you. Folks, if you have these timing codes for this engine, first thing you do is fresh oil change and oil control valves. That's the first thing you do. Folks, always research. When you find a trusted mechanic that does good work, stick to them, because this is the problem with the automotive industry. All the good mechanics slowly leaving and not being replaced. Dealerships are hiring whoever because they have no bodies. all the older, experienced mechanics, they're retiring, leaving, and the mid-aged mechanics. I left the dealership to open my shop, and many other mechanics just changed their career entirely because the automotive industry, a hostile business, especially at the dealership. Underpaid, overworked, unappreciated. These are the three words you'll hear every good mechanic say working at a dealership. There are good dealerships out there that treat their people well, but they're far in between, unfortunately. So be careful out there. And when you get a condemnation of a car, take it to another mechanic. Always get a second opinion. You get a second opinion when it comes to doctors and your health. Get a second opinion for your cars. If a mechanic gets offended, they'll get over it. It's all right. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos. Until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.